Good afternoon. Okay, good afternoon. I'd like to offer great thanks to the organizers of this event, in particular, Leptina Solovyenva, for giving me the honor of presenting a keynote speech at this conference in honor of Professor Boris L. Riftin. I had the pleasure of meeting Professor Riftin a few times at meetings of the China Pro organization, most memorably in 1996 at a conference hosted by Professor Vibeke Bordal at the Nordic Institute of Asian Studies in Copenhagen. Professor Riftin, who lives on in his copious works, is a true icon in the field of traditional Chinese folklore and produced an amazing corpus of work in depth and breadth of subject matter. His work continues to have impact today, most recently in the publication of Dungan folk tales translated by Kenneth J. Eam in 2021 from the hefty volume of Russian translations of Dungan oral literature edited by Professor Riftin in 1977. Today, I would like to discuss aspects of a project that has occupied me for over 10 years, a project which came to a sort of fruition with the publication of the Norsu Book of Origins, a creation epic from Southwest China, published by University of Washington Press in 2019. The volume is a collaborative effort between myself, Professor Luo Qing-chun, also known as Aku Wu, well-known ethnic minority poet of the Southwest Minzu University in Chengdu, Sichuan Province, China, and Jivo Zochu, a tradition bearer who provided the Northern E language texts that our working group translated, and who for many years demonstrated his knowledge of the epic in oral contests held between folk singers at weddings and funeral events. I will concentrate on aspects of the epic that reflect the intertwining relations between the tropes of origins, genealogy, migration, and the idea of ideal place, set within quite particular niches in the local environment. Becoming aware of these entanglements may be useful in examining other epics, as well as long narrative poems from other ethnic groups in Southwest China, the Eastern Himalayas, and Southeast Asia, an area sometimes known as Zomia. Let's begin by looking at a few lines from the Phlo Rachanad, an origin epic of the Wipo or Khoibu, a small Tibeto-Burman group in Manipur, Northeast India. The translation of the epic, recited by Yarong Yama Xiaotrimran Saka, was published in 2018 in cooperation with the University of Tartu. Though this volume is my first encounter with Wipo folk literature, certain features of the epic resonated with the epic that is the subject of today's address. The story unfolds as a migration in ways similar to the dispersals in the Norsu epic, the Book of Origins. After emerging from a hole in the ground, an alternative motif to origins in the sky, as we see in the Book of Origins, the people confront certain difficulties as they set off on a series of migrations across the landscape, marked by descriptions of local flora, fauna, and land and water forms. After many trials and tribulations, they finally find a place where thereat Wipo Bandam began to settle, began to prosper, to begin livelihood thereat, to beget prosperity thereat. However, they soon find out the place is lacking water, so they follow the tracks of Sambar and Boar, and with the humming of a bee, find hidden water source, which they name, and dig into a pool, which allows the righteous, mannerly young people to prosper over many generations. The intersection of origins, genealogy, and knowing descriptions of the local environment is set within a format I call an ecogenealogy, a term which I define as origin narratives told in a genealogical format that is linked directly to webs of life forms in a local environment, often relating the search for an ideal place to settle. The accompanying triangle is a simple depiction of a much more complex process that unfolds in both written and oral versions of the epic. In my talk today, I will examine and introduce some background on the Norsu and the Book of Origins, then shift to a discussion of the ecogenealogical format in the Norsu Book of Origins, expanding on some ideas presented in the introduction to the translation of the epic and fleshing out the key ideas surrounding the ecogenealogical triangle. Briefly, numbering about 2.3 million, the Norsu are the largest division out of more than 80 subgroups of the E ethnic groups, known in Chinese as Yizu, one of China's 55 official ethnic minority groups. About 10 million E, comprised of over 80 subgroups of upland agriculturalists in Yunnan, Guizhou, Sichuan, and Guangxi, speak Tibeto-Burman dialects or languages, living mostly in southern Sichuan province and the borders of Yunnan province. The Norsu speak a cluster of dialects called Northern E. The origins of the Book of Origins, or Wote are still in question, though hints from ancient E writings, oral tradition, and historical and archaeological evidence suggest the textual hearth is the area that includes northeast Yunnan, the western quadrant of what is now Guizhou, and parts of present-day Liangshan Prefecture in southern Sichuan. The epic continues to exist in many written versions, handed down by generations of Bimo priests and other tradition bearers. The ritual specialists perform portions of the epic orally during rituals, sometimes cued by the written scripts and sometimes from memory. At certain life cycle events, particularly weddings and funerals, folk singers, such as Jivo Zochu in his earlier days, elaborately extemporize passages of the poem based on oral or written versions with which they are familiar. Thus, the epic is not considered as solely a text of ritualists, that is a Bimo Ta'i or Bimo book, but is shared among differing transmitters whose versions comprise the epic in all its written, orally dynamic, and imagined forms. Along with the written texts, oral performances, and the singer's mental templates, themes and motifs in the epic are found in many other aspects of E-verbal art, including folk tales, origin chants, and proverbs. The E and Liangshan were once known for their stratified social system, in which the population was divided into 4 castes: the relatively small upper caste Noho, the larger caste of serfs, or white E, consisting of a caste called Chuho, a yet lower caste called Gajia, and a caste called Gashi, which included slaves of the lowest status. This last caste was partially comprised of peoples captured from other ethnic groups, especially Han living in outposts within the Liangshan area or in settlements on its margins. Both Gajia and Gashi were typically without clan affiliations. Thus, the genealogical picture of the Norsu was and is complicated and involved interethnic recruiting of population into the lower ranks of society. This complexity is to some degree reflected in the Book of Origins. The greatest concentration of the text used in our translation concentrates on genealogies of early Norsu clans and their movements through the landscape, which sometimes include encounters that highlight the exclusive genealogies of the upper classes. Let me pause for a second here and let's take a look at some of these pictures. These are these priests that we're calling bimo. You can see here this person is holding their scriptures, which are written in the unique E script. This person has a ritual fan. There's an eagle, there's a tiger, and there's an otter representing the realms of the sky, the land, and the waters. This is Jibo Zochu reciting from the Book of Origins. This would be in a more formal context. And then over here, we have two people who are reciting portions of some sort of oral, Norsu oral performance, and they're standing together and sort of moving back and forth like this as each one, as they alternate between passages of whatever they're performing. And sometimes the Book of Origins is performed this way at weddings or funerals. These are women in traditional dress doing a folk dance in a sort of contrived context. And here is the words for the Norsu castes. The upper class group, known as Zumo, even more powerful than the Noho, were affiliated with the imperial regime by the Tusa system. This system, which was utilized by in the Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties, was based on the principle of granting official titles to native leaders as a means to control the mountain areas of the Southwest. From at least the Ming, some of the Zimo elites were ensconced as Tusa. The word Zimo, or simply Zi, appears numerous times in this version of the Book of Origins, especially in part 12, the genealogy of Shirley Wote, when recounting the marriage of Shirley Wote, an early descendant of humans, who we will soon discover evolved after a pivotal era of extreme heat destroyed the initial phase of life on Earth. Written versions of the Book of Origins are among many texts from the Southwest that have survived the ages, all of which are cast as poetry. The texts include lyrics for rituals dealing with harmful ghosts, worshiping dragons, mountain gods, other local gods, and reverencing ancestors, pointing the way lyrics and other funeral chants, chants to call back wandering souls, moralistic texts like the Book of Teachings or Mamutui that give advice on proper conduct, historical accounts including narratives of the Great Flood and battles with outsider enemies, clan genealogies, origin stories, astronomy and divination texts, folk medicine, poems, folk stories and songs, long narrative poems, treatises on poetics and philosophy, literary criticism, and a very few translations from traditional Chinese literature make up most of the text. Still, a relatively unknown literature outside small academic circles, some significant examples of oral and written literature have been translated into Chinese, and a few works into other languages. Here's a picture of some of the landscape from the Liangshan region in Mianning County. The version of the Book of Origins our working group translated begins with two origin narratives that relate the genealogies of the sky and earth, and are the first of many origin accounts in the text. A persistent trope of genealogies underlies the entire Book of Origins, and multiform segments cast in a genealogical format are commonly repeated throughout. This structure is closely linked to the pervasive Norsu interest in the genealogies of present-day clans. A few of these genealogies have been published in bilingual editions and consist entirely of male family names going back generations. Bimo and clan tradition bearers claim that some clans can be traced back more than 70 generations. Whether or not some degree fictive, these deep genealogies suggest huge webs of family relations. In everyday life, it is of extreme importance that clan affiliations be clarified in any major social situation, such as weddings and funerals, as well as in daily situations where those unfamiliar with each other meet. Indeed, the entire content of the latter part of the epic concerns the migrations and movements of early clans. These clans are thought to be offshoots of the original 6 tribes, who at some early date split apart at a cultural hearth often thought to be northeast Yunnan, called Zizipuvu in the ancient lore, and went their various ways, some entering the Liangshan region of southern Sichuan. Like so many other things in the Book of Origins, the migrations of the clans are all cast within the frame of genealogies, and it is difficult to link most of the place names with places on today's maps. Thus, the Norsu stance toward the past seems genealogical rather than historic. The dilemma is whether to consider the ancient genealogies, migration accounts, events, and personages as, at least, legends with some historical basis, or to regard them as rhetorical compositions created to maintain some sort of legitimacy within a family, clan, or other social form. Part 12 of the epic relates the era after the Great Overheating, beginning with the falling of the life force Ge from the sky, followed by red snow that evolves into the 12 sons or offspring or tribes, depending upon how you translate the word, tribes of snow, divided between plants and animals, of which humans are a part. The son of snow, surely Wote, is introduced as a descendant of these snow tribes. He was born in an era before the institution of marriage, and thus reaching manhood, sets out to find a father, but ultimately finds a wife, a process that Chinese scholars have described as the evolution from matriarchal to patriarchal society. Though first tempted by the daughter of an upper caste Zimo leader who asks him a series of questions, he can only answer by consulting his wise younger sister. He rejects the marriage and sets off to roam the land. Finally, after many travels and the rejection of many brides, he stuck an arrow in his hair and wrapped his hair high above it, and accepted a suitable woman as his wife. The couple become the progenitors of descendants, and the customs described in their wedding rituals still serve as cultural templates today. After several generations, 3 brothers are born with the name Jumu. One day, while guarding a just plowed plot of wild lands, they are approached by an elder in black clothes who is leading a wild yellow hog. This elder is a god in disguise sent by the sky god Ngetiguza to test the virtue of the 3 brothers. The 2 elder brothers rashly wish to kill or beat the visitor, but the youngest one, named Jumuvuvu, asks to hear what he has to say. It is revealed that the sky god is angry over the outcome of a deadly fight between a being from the sky and an earthling. The enraged sky god has decided to flood the earth in revenge for the killing of a celestial being. The man in black then instructs the 3 brothers to prepare wooden beds in which to weather the coming catastrophe. Mythologist Li Zixian of Yunnan University has described a range of such flood-avoiding vehicles in the mythology of Southwest China, of which calabashes are the most common escape vehicle. but in this epic, the vehicle of escape is a wooden bed. This could refer to a kind of wooden sleeping chamber once used by upper-class Yi and Han Chinese, though the exact nature is unclear. While Vuvu's elder brothers are instructed to prepare vehicles laden with iron tools, Vuvu's vehicle is hung with grains. In the end, the virtuous Jumuvuvu survives the flood along with the number of small animals he rescues from the flood waters, including a rat, a snake, a frog, a crow, and a ring-necked pheasant. Later, with the help of the wise frog king and the rescued animal helpers, Jumuvuvu tries to connect with the sky in search of a bride, since he is the only remaining human. After long negotiations with representatives of the sky god, a compromise is reached in which the god was cured of a snake bite and his all-important soul-holding vessel, which was stolen by a rat, was returned to him. In return, Tigudza let down iron and bronze wires to raise metal pillars that allow the poor earthling to ascend and marry his youngest daughter, Nitor. When leaving the sky, however, she stealthily takes along her horses, as well as seeds of the three Norsu staples, the Volma turnip, hemp, and buckwheat. Once the sky god discovers the theft, he curses the Norsu with a Spartan upland lifestyle based on the stolen crop seeds and severs the links between sky and earth. Thereafter, the celestial and earthly couple produced 3 children, all of whom are mute. Though easy access to the sky has ended, a series of small creatures attempt but fail to access the sky palace to learn the secrets of speech. Finally, the Apuyocho bird overhears a conversation between the sky god and his wife and flies back to earth with the secret. Climbing the highest peak, the couple then boil pieces of bamboo until bursting, the sound stimulating the children to speak, thus giving voice to the different languages of the region. Norsu, Hanga, which we presume is the Han language, and Odzu, which is the Norsu name for several local peoples classified as Tibetan by the government. This is a sample page of a bilingual genealogy that was published in 2017 by a private family. This is a picture of the culture hero Jagaalu shooting down extra suns in the era to end the era of overheating, which is followed by Shirley Wote's area. And here's a scene of the sort of a landscape that we encounter in the epic. So thereafter, the various clans of these people spread out across the land. This sort of ethnogenesis that involves the differentiation of peoples by language and dwelling place in the local environment, which is understood in vertical terms from lowlands to mountains, is common to the ecogenealogical format of many epics in the Eastern Himalayas. The last 15 parts of the Book of Origins describe migrations of Norsu clans across landscapes of what appear to be Southwest China, though migration stories through landscapes similar to these in the epic are told in the folklore of many other peoples in the Eastern Himalayas, including groups such as the Miaomong, Yawa, Hani, Jingpo in Southwest China and Southeast Asia, and the Apatani of Arunachal Pradesh, and some other ethnic groups in Northeast India. Some of these migration narratives may be linked to actual experiences of the forebears of contemporary clans, especially in the details of searching for suitable places to settle and criteria that instigate actual settlement. Among the reasons for migrating are depletion of local resources, overpopulation, and warfare. One or more of these factors motivate the migrants to begin a search for a place with better conditions, or at least amicable ones. The searches are processes by which groups of a given people move through the landscape on foot or by boat as they encounter situations of varying degrees of favorability and unfavorability. Thus, one way of appreciating the latter part of the Book of Origins is to examine structure and content in light of criteria for finding a suitable or ideal niche in which to settle and prosper. The migration passages are in some ways the most enigmatic parts of the Book of Origins. Overall, they lack the detail and action of the first 12 parts of the epic that concern the various phases of the creation. The latter sections mainly relate the migrations of individual groups throughout the post-flood world. So let's look at some of the structural examples in the search for an ideal place. Structurally, these migration sections are constituted largely of genealogies, in long series of begats, in which names of clans and male forebears and descendants are listed in the context of genealogical relationships, and places within the landscape that mark the migration routes associated with clan dispersal and settlement. I like to point to one example from part 19, the Norsu lineages. That's the title of this section, which is a passage exhibiting names of persons and places, as well as a vivid detail of an unusual tree, which is likely the metonym of rich local lore that is still in need of explication. So as we see on the slide here, and on the right-hand side, we have the Norsu version in romanization, and also in the new style standard script, which was based on the ancient E script. Vuvuguza was a Norsu, whose generation was followed by 3 Guza sons, followed by the generation of Guza Shurma, followed by the generation of Shurma Shursi, who settled at Zoarni on the Arni Mountain. A white colored tree grew, putting forth white leaves, flowers blooming everywhere as if birthed by a goddess. Although nearly all the migration accounts in the epic make some mention of searching for a suitable place or suitable conditions for settlement, the criteria for settling are most detailed in part 23, the genealogy of the Nzi clan. As the various Nzi families fan out through the landscape in search of ideal places to settle, they sometimes leave behind a few families. In other cases, it seems the entire group moves on. The text explicitly states whether a place is found suitable or unsuitable to the migrants. As the trek continues, certain criteria for suitability emerge, giving us insight into what sort of ideal niche the migrants were searching for, and what sorts of places some of them accepted. As quoted in the introduction to our translation of the Book of Origins, we have this passage, the Wuwugiza Yo. When they came to Sagukanya, they looked at a place, Achabilu. At Achabilu, black cows plowed the earth. Spoons with broken handles were used to eat. It was not a suitable place to settle down. The Nzi were not willing to migrate there. In this passage, the lineage called Wuwugiza is explicitly named. In succeeding parts, the group is referred to either as the zi or by a pronoun such as they. The first 8 lines contain a multiform structure that is repeated throughout the rest of the passage. The multiform consists of 4 moves: arrival at a vantage point, surveying a place within sight, assessment, and decision. In the first move, the group comes to a particular place, and from that vantage point, they enact the second move by looking at or surveying another place. The surveying elicits an evaluative comment on unsuitability or suitability. At this point, a decision is made either to settle or settle part of the group or leave. Throughout part 23, this multiform pattern is repeated 25 times, and the 4 basic moves are repeated in each instance, though the length and degree of elaboration is different. There is no set line length. Many multiforms are as short as 8 or 9 lines, and some are many lines in length. The spatiality evoked in moves 1 and 2 suggests an undulating landscape of valleys with hills that serve as overlooks onto territory to be crossed or avoided. The landscape is often already inhabited, though in some cases, those areas uninhabited by humans are described or implied. In the passage above, 2 factors are judged as negative: the cattle used to plow and the spoons with broken handles. The reference to black cows may show a preference for another type of cattle or buffalo, or the term may be a marker for a certain caste or economic level, though that is complicated by the association of the color black with elite in Nosu culture. Whatever the case, the implication is that the local cattle, assuming they are cattle and not a symbol for something else, are markers of an unsuitable place. The other unsuitable factor is that the locals use spoons with broken handles to eat, suggesting the area is very poor and therefore not a suitable place to settle. Thus, the Zi continue on their way, not settling there because the ideal niche conditions have not been met. Here's a picture of a typical Nosu 3-colored bowl, and you can see that there are several spoons here. These are the eating tools. Their chopsticks were not traditionally used, or any other device. So it's these wooden spoons. So since they're made of wood, the handles can break quite easily. The next passage replicates the multiform structure. They stood at Achabilu and looked at the place near Arjo. One's skin burned in the day, and long clothes were needed at night. The Ni came there and ran off. The Shua came there and ran off. It was not a suitable place to settle down. The Zi were not willing to migrate there to live. Again, we observe the moves of arrival, surveying, assessment, and decision. In this case, there are also 2 unsuitable environmental factors. The sun is extremely bright during the day and is so cold at night that special clothes are needed to keep warm. These conditions may be the result of high altitude and lack of cloud cover, or other factors. The conditions are so unsuitable, so hostile, that neither the Ni, an ancient word referring to the E or Nosu, or the Shua, an ancient word referring to Han or Hanga, as they're more typically called today in Nosu, people can bear them. Thus, the search continues. In the next passage, cultural mixing is the basis of negative assessment. They stood at the place near Arjo and looked at the place Lega Gyorjo at Lega Jojo. Ni people spoke Hanga speech when born. Shua people grew Norsu braids when born. Water buffalo and yellow cows plowed side by side, plowed in one direction and split up when finished plowing. Ni and Shua customs were mixed, going outside together, but returning home to two places. Shua people grew long braids. Shua women wore long pants. It was not a suitable place to settle down. Minzi were not willing to migrate there to live. What appears to be an ethnically mixed community could be an area where Hanga or Han people and Yi lived in close proximity, and some customs were shared. Although similar in many ways, cultural distinctions were maintained. Such mixed communities of Yi and Han have been documented in places throughout the Southwest. Speech, draught animals, and ways of braiding hair seem to have been borrowed mutually or in one direction. Today, in common Norsu parlance, water buffaloes, Ini, represent Han people, whereas black cattle, oxen, Ni, represent Norsu. In the lines, the Hanga or Chinese women are differentiated by wearing pants. Historically, Norsu women have worn long pleated skirts, though many Yi women in Yunnan and Guizhou wear pants. Nevertheless, the mixing of cultural traits renders the place unsuitable for the Zi, who seem to haughtily disdain the situation, wishing to maintain their pure ways. As noted in the introduction to our translation of the Norsu Book of Origins, the niche criteria embedded in the epic text offer insight into the sort of environmental niches that the migrants in the text found to be suitable or suitable for settling. The negative criteria that caused the migrants to avoid settling in certain places include general ones such as weather, geophysical state of the locale, poverty, unacceptable social relations, harmful supernatural beings, freakish animals or animal behavior, lack of mutual languages, lack of resources, lack of ritual flora, such as certain grasses used in rituals, unsuitable food, and contamination by death. Finally, the Zi clan arrives at what they ultimately deem as a suitable place, and it is a place called Zizipuvu. The name of this place circulates throughout Norsu lore as the home site of the ancient 6 tribes that ultimately broke up and went their ways across the landscape. The name is also associated with a place where the souls of proper Norsu return to after the death of the body, guided by chants of Bimo priests. Here, the term at least indicates a special ideal place, as evidenced by a series of passages extolling its suitability. One passage reads, "At the place Zizipuvu, above the dwellings were mountains for raising goats. Below the dwellings were paddies for raising grain. And in the middle were dwelling places. There were also grasslands for raising horses, and there were wet spots for raising pigs. There were places for maidens to find shade under the eaves." So the children and grandchildren of the Zi were willing to migrate to Zizipuvu to live. The positive criteria that induced the Zi migrants to settle are very specific. Hillsides for tending sheep, grasslands for grazing horses, and wet spots for pigs all meet the suitable criteria. A varied diet, including fish and possibly rice, a grain that cannot be grown in the high mountain areas where most Norsu have grown buckwheat in recent centuries, is available, as are pine resources for light and fuel. In the long-sought place, domestic animals prosper in ways that seem magical, growing quickly and sturdily. The strong fecund livestock that wear out plows and supply copious oil and lard show the suitability of the place. As the generations pass, the self-sufficient martial power of the group is reflected by imagery of glimmering swords and horses, reinforcing the self-image as being a dominant, highly successful force within their environmental and cultural realm, an image that could be striven for by other clan groups. Thus is the outcome of one of the many clans descended from the generations following Shirley Wote, a descendant of the offspring of snow. Now to sum up, recalling the passage from the Tlo Ratchanad, an origin epic of the Wipo or Koibu that I cited at the beginning, let us take a final look. Oh, here's a picture of Jivozochu's family on one of the trips that we made up into the mountains. He's over on the right-hand side here after he had given an epic performance. And many of his family members now work outside of this area, the younger ones, rather far-flung, working in urban areas across the country. Okay, so revisiting our map. So I cited at the beginning, let's take a final look at the chart illustrating the process of ecogenealogy, comprised of the factors of reciting genealogy, local environment, migration, and the search for an ideal place. I argue that becoming aware of the dynamics of this process helps to understand the interactions between culture and environment, transmission of lore by means of epic logic and rhetorical structures, and glimpses into ideas of connectedness with other life forms within the trope of genealogy. The search for an ideal place is a hopeful social vision on individual and group levels that contributes to developing a sense of place within local hierarchies of ethnicity and culture, ensconced within an environment illustrated metonymically by rich cosmographic imagery, as well as delineating basics of the kind of cultural toolkit that are most effectively utilized within the given ecological situations presented in the mythical story world of the Book of Origins and other epics of the general region sharing similar structural content. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Professor. Time for questions. Very beautiful examples. So, I actually have quite many questions, but I would like also not to occupy all the space. So probably I will start with some of them. So as I understood that mythological motifs, which is linking to origins and genealogy of community, they are kind of recreated in regular rituals. But is there something in occasional rituals when, for example, something happening with the community, something unexpected, or some, I don't know, some unfortunate, like?
Well, the genealogies, I'm certainly not a expert on clan structure or genealogy among the Norse. Some of my anthropology friends, such as Steve Harrell, are much better at that. But in my interactions at rituals, part of every ritual, well, starting out with just two people meeting. I've seen this so many times where people will meet each other, maybe for the first time, and they will go through these sort of rituals of finding out how we may be related. And this entails the reciting of clan genealogies, which may go back many generations. And the young people, especially the young males, are taught, still taught how to recite these genealogies. Now, when you have maybe something wrong in your home, okay, there's some feeling of unease or something bad has happened, you may invite a ritualist, a bimo, and his assistant into your home, and they will set up their little altar of various sorts of plants and other items in a corner, and they will perform rituals to get rid of negative forces in the household. And as a part of all of these rituals, and this would include that sort of home ritual as well as larger community rituals that might be held every few years, there is a recitation of genealogies, not only of that family, but often of the other neighboring families in the area. If the bimo is good, he knows all the genealogies of the various families in the areas. So in this manner, the genealogies are very, very important. And of course, when it comes into wedding customs and things like that, the genealogies are certainly very important. As we said before, the Nosu, Nosu East Society, Northern East Society was a caste society. This was broken apart in the 1950s by the Chinese government, and the slaves and serfs were set free, liberated, however you want to say it. But it's interesting that a very large proportion of those lower castes had been captives. They were often Chinese, Han Chinese, who had been captured and enslaved, and they were the lower classes, and therefore they didn't have the sort of genealogy that the upper class Black E or Nosu, Noho classes had. And so these genealogies have very much a caste nature to them, which, even though the system was broken up in the past, there certainly has an influence today, especially in seeking marriage partners, which is, of course, are arrangements between clans, between families. And so there is still an impress of this. So the genealogy aspect is, in terms of daily life, is still very important, in my understanding anyway.
Thank you a lot. Yes, and just addition to my previous question, as you mentioned it, because in different societies, there is kind of, when it's concerning genealogy, there is a particular amount of generation which a person should know about himself or herself. So usually in that region, I know that a person should know at least 7 generations behind. And what about Nosu?
Nosu, some of them claim that they can go back at least 50 generations. And that this book, let me go back a few slides and show you this. Yes, this is from a very, very thick book of this one particular clan. And this book has got a couple hundred pages of it. And this goes back, it could go back several hundred years. And these are all lists of the various, patriarchs and their sons, and then their sons, and then their sons, and then their sons, and their sons, going back really, really long. And some of these 50, 60, 70 generations. And it's to the extent that some of the scholars or people working on this material in China have actually tried to use these genealogies, like working back, thinking, well, a generation is about 30 years. So if it's 30 generations, and this is probably sometime in the Tang Dynasty or whatever, and have tried to use these genealogies to date the material about how far it goes back. So some people, they take this as very literal records. In other cases, of course, we have this phenomena where people for various reasons will fabricate, lineages for whatever reason. So this is certainly a fascinating aspect of this. We don't have corroboration in Chinese texts, for instance, as we do in, with some other ethnic groups sometimes. Some of the texts in Guizhou do have a certain degree of corroboration from Chinese histories or what have you, but it's very, very touch and go with these things. So you pretty much have to rely on these scattered texts that have been transmitted through these various lineages of Bima priests throughout the era. A lot of these texts have been collected. There's hundreds or thousands of them in archives in China and other places in the world. One of the problems that we're confronting is the number of people are still able to read these texts, but nevertheless the genealogy is serious, and this will take up quite a lot of ritual time and space during these rituals, is the recitation of the things. And it's not just the genealogies of people. This whole book of origins, it's genealogy of the cosmos, of the universe, of the sun, the moon, the planet, the plants and animals. It's their genealogy as well. It's all origin stories. There's all these stories of origins. And what fascinates me about it is how these things are often so well connected into the environment. So you have these 12 sons of snow or tribes of snow or whatever that were created after everything, all the life forms on Earth got destroyed by too many suns and moons in the sky. But after that period was over, in this era where surely Wote comes up, you got this situation where you got the 12 tribes of snow, which are 6 without blood and 6 with blood, and those without blood are the plants, and those with blood are various animals, frog, snake, bear, monkey, and humans are just tied right into that. So it's quite fascinating how humans are literally tied in with these animal and plant origins, sharing space, there on the earth. And then later this ethnogenesis of these various local peoples is also part of the mythology. So yes.
Sorry for interruption. Yeah, it was just some occasional, I guess.
Oh, I thought it was a question. Okay.
But please continue if you.
Well, that's what I was basically saying, that everything's about origins, and so many things in e-rituals, they have to recite these origins things. They have to, talk about the origins of ghosts for certain ceremonies, and then some of the things, such as in this, particularly the genealogy of Shirley Wote, who we were talking a little bit about, where he goes, searching for a wife. Some of those that content gets recited at weddings to explain why such and such a custom is being followed, why certain people sit in a certain place or serve first or whatever. And now, of course, this version that we're looking at is just one version. There's many, many versions of this orally when it's performed. I showed you that one picture of the two people sort of moving back and forth here on the right-hand side, where they're doing this kind of performance. Is they're sort of conveying information, almost like in a question and answer format, sometimes testing each other's knowledge, about who did what, why, what's the origin of this or that. And the Bima would have a different sort of thing where they just recite, quite close to what the text is, but there's a little bit more different format in the live format. That's something that we may be investigating, documenting more in the future. But it's interesting that over here on the left-hand side, Jivo Zochu, when he was a younger man, he participated in hundreds of these performances. And so he had this deep knowledge of the text, but he also, he was not a Bimor priest, but an older Bimor priest gave him access to the written script and actually taught him how to do it. And he studied with several other Bimor and learned how to write these scripts. And so he was able to take one of these scripts and which was in very, very bad condition, and then transcribe this, write it down, and then also was able to put it in the modern e-script. So that made it much more accessible to people. So he and his nephew took the time to write all this down. A lot of this was done, during the Cultural Revolution. He hid out in the mountains for a number of years, and this is one of the things that he did. And then I was introduced to him in the early 2000s by Luo Qingchun, or Aku Wu, who's a very, very well-known Norsu poet who composes in Norsu language and who draws a lot on mythology and the Book of Origins and a lot of his poetry. And so we worked together. We got made a Chinese translation and a word for word English translation, and sort of triangulated with our various language skills involving some graduate students and whatever, and basically decoded this text word for word over the space of several years. We didn't really have a big grant to do this. I run a study abroad program to Aku's University, where I take my kids from my university, Ohio State, and pair them up with kids, Norsu kids from his university, and they spend a month together, cultural sharing. And Aku and I would spend all our spare time working on this sort of project, translating Aku's poetry and also working with Jivo Zochu on the Book of Origins. That's kind of a little backstory on how we produce this text.
Amazing story. Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Yeah. May I?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Bender, for this amazing lecture. I just wanted to ask about the transmission of this tradition, oral and written. I mean, how many young Bimors are there, really? And how much of the younger generation is interested in this culture and really understand it?
That's a really good question. The E people have about 10 million people, okay? And there's about 2.3 million Norsu people. Most of the E people live in Yunnan province and quite a few in Guizhou province. And I did a survey through those areas, not a comprehensive survey, but enough to get some sense of what was going on around 2007. And then, I've been back, in the Norsu areas from every year from 2005 to 2019, that whole period of time. So, and that's a question that I'm occupied with too. I would definitely say that, especially in Guizhou province and increasingly in Yunnan province, there's fewer and fewer people who are learning these traditions, but there have been attempts at revival. There's actually small study groups in some areas where people are gathering to learn these traditions. Most of them are male. There may be a few women. I met one woman, Bimor, in Yunnan one time. She had an interesting take on it. I asked her, because I asked her how she'd learned the mythologies, the origin texts and whatever. And she said that she had received them in dreams. And I asked her, well, what's the future? Do you have any students? And she replied, well, the spirits will find them. So so that's a whole nother realm, that scholars often don't consider. But there was a period of time in the 80s and 90s where there were a lot of younger people who were quite interested in these things, and you hear these stories of a large number of young men wanting to become BMO. To a certain extent, in the Norsu areas of Sichuan, that is true to a certain extent in the rural areas. There are younger people studying these things, but the problem that's emerged over the last, couple decades is because so many young people get drawn away to work outside these areas. It's a real conflict. But then you do have those who, learn these traditions. Some of them are more visible than others. There's others who are not visible. Maybe those who live farther back. But there are BMO who are willing to come to public events, and those who are not. So it's a very interesting question, but I would say that these traditions will still be transmitted orally for the foreseeable future, but like anything else, any of these other oral traditions we're dealing with anywhere in the world, they're subject to these intense pressures. There's too many other options for the young people. But there were problems when I was in Yunnan and Guizhou about in some villages that we talked to, they couldn't find BMO to officiate with ceremonies, and they had to, ask them to come in from other areas. And within Liangshan, it's still popular, even in urban areas. In some of the cities in Liangshan prefectures, you'll see BMO walking along the street with their ceremonial paraphernalia, carrying plants and things like that. And you can see little chicken feathers daubed with blood above people's doorways. So you know that the rituals have been going on there. And I've been at rituals in people's living rooms, literally where pigs and chickens were slaughtered. And so things still go on.
Thank you very much. And another just very small question about the other type. If I understand it correctly, there is another type of ritual specialists in Norse culture, Sunni, no?
Yeah, the Sunni, yeah.
They
Sunni
not unconnected with the written tradition at all.
Well, that's also an interesting question. So you have Sunni, which are the male ritualists, shamans is sometimes, and then you have Moni, who are the female shamans. And in that realm, the BMO, we have very, very few records of female BMO, but many Sunni or Moni, as they're called, many, actually, there's a lot of active Moni today. Some of them are extremely well known and who can do incredible feats. There's one woman who's known for the ability to go into a trance and pick up a live sheep in her mouth and twirl it around the room. So it's pretty outstanding. And I interacted with some of these people, and their insights into people's lives and things like that. It's pretty astounding sometimes, but it's interesting that, gone several times to places in Xichang and the old market towns there, and you'll see these persons sitting there, and you sometimes can't really tell if they're BMO or Sunni. There's some Sunni who have actually, because they see the sort of rewards that some of these people posing as BMO anywhere have been able to get with association with written texts, have actually come up somehow or another with written text. Some of these are even Xeroxed, made by photocopies sometimes. But strictly speaking, the Sunni don't deal with the written scripts. So they're not the ones who hand those things down. But the margins are a little bit fuzzy, I think, sometimes between these ritualists in today's society.
Thank you very much.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello. First of all, would like to greet Professor Bender because I have read so much of your work for so long, and that's the first time actually we can meet so on Zoom. My name is Rostislav. And,
Yes, yes, I'm very familiar with your name. Yes, and I've read a lot of your material too on Jiangqing and this sort of thing.
Yeah, it's very embarrassing. So I'm really glad to see you today. And I have just one question. So very interesting topic of sun shooting, right? So there is also the archer in this ethnicity mythology. And Professor Riftin also paid attention to this. So seems to be common motif with the archer in the ancient Chinese mythology. So what is your interpretation of this topic? How did it happen? They have this common.
Well, that's a really good question. And in my experience, it's not confined to just Han, because the Han mythic traditions, you've got Hou-Yi, right, who shoots down the extra suns. And in the Yi tradition, you've got Zhiga Alu, and then you've got in Yunnan province, you have a number of other myths that, basically it's a Zhiga Alu type figure. But also among Miao people, among Hmong people over in Guizhou province, some of those groups also have this figure of Sangsa, who is also a hero who comes along and, tries to shoot down the extra suns and moons that are overheating the earth. And, the pattern is often they'll try to find a suitable tree to stand in or a bush. And so they'll move to this small thing, it doesn't hold them. They go to a slightly larger one, it doesn't hold them. In fact, it bends over, and that's why that tree is bent over today. And then finally, they'll find a tree that's a suitable platform for them for shooting down the suns and moons. Why these things are common, I think that probably goes along with answers of why so many other motifs are common, such as the idea of the sky being held up by columns, or this connection of metal sort of columns between sky and earth. In the Nosu, those were lost, but in the Miao versions, they've got mountains where they can identify, well, that's where one of the pillars holding up the sky is. And so you've got some of that in Han mythology as well. You've got the Great Flood, okay, that permeates through there. So it was sort of point, I think, in the direction of these myth traditions being quite widespread, throughout some of these cultures of South and Southwest China, going way back. I mean, you're talking about maybe Chu kingdoms or whatever, far, very, very far back. And somehow or another, these things get transmitted. Now, it's whether that's by ritualists who are interacting with each other, these dispersions of migration of peoples from the Central Plains or going other places. These are really interesting questions. And then there's all these interesting questions about the origins of E-language, origins of written Chinese. Some E scholars claim that there's only two native full-blown writing systems in China that go back into antiquity, and one of those is Han tradition, the other is the Yi tradition. They try to make those cases, but in any case, there's been a long period of interaction. Certainly some of these texts from Guizhou province, it's very clear that there's been some relationship to Taoism mixed up in some of those writings. So it's a really good question, but I think it's a subset of a larger set of questions about how these various myths, traditions are related within these various groups in China. So that's my thing. It's very, very happy to see you today. Your work on these prosometric traditions in South, the Jiangnan region are just fantastic. I really, really have enjoyed reading and interacting with those your writings.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to the both of you. Dear colleagues, please go ahead with questions and don't miss this very rare and very fortunate opportunity.
Oh, I have two questions, maybe small. I just ask one about these genealogies that people that also learn by heart, yes, and they have it their home. So every family has it, yes, and there's just a list of names, or it contains some information about these people, about their life, or maybe something.
The text that I showed you the pictures of, I've been going through this book, and it's just lists of names. Now, there may be other situations where there may be more details, such as in the Norsu Book of Origins, these last 15 parts that we looked at. It was very tedious translating these things because so much of it is just this repetition of these various names without very much elaboration, but occasionally there is something there about a particular place. They did such and such in a place. So-and-so was an official in such and such a place. But generally there's not a lot of detail. One way of explaining that would be that the genealogies are a kind of prompt book in a sense. So in the sense of, John Miles Foley has talked a lot about, that idea of metonymy, where, you say a name and it opens up a door where you could add in more orally that way. That could be possible. There's other texts that would have a little bit more information in them, but in terms of these ritual, those because there's another set of e-writing which is a little bit more discursive. And so there might be possibilities for that. There are certain things which we could call histories in e-writing also. But those tend to be, they're written in verse also. But and one of my graduate students, Xiaowen Yuan, just did a dissertation on these texts from Shinan Yizhi, from Annals of the Southwest E, which were basically this huge compendium of texts that were gathered within a Bimo family over, had texts from several generations, 100 or so at least different texts. And this was all edited and or put together, collocated by scholars in Guizhou province who could actually read these things, and made it into this big thing they call the South Chronicles of the Southwest E. And some of the text in there will have a little bit more detail in things, but generally it's almost, especially in the Book of Origins, it's like you're looking back into this kind of mythical story world. And so sometimes you may get details about how such and such a family of brothers killed their mother and cut her up into pieces, and this later becomes the basis for other sorts of rituals, or there's lots of details about places, but we're not really sure very often where these places are. Even this idea of Zizipuvu probably is just an ideal place that everybody's trying to find. Other E groups, Sani down in Yunnan province, they also have these stories of searching for the ideal places and so forth. They're pretty prominent in their folklore. And generally speaking, I mean, I'm sure that you can find some of these families have put together more detailed accounts of their more recent ancestors, but going back in history, you get some of these things, such as the female Bimo Amaini, who supposedly lived back who knows when, Han Dynasty, wherever, Tang Dynasty, whenever, and you may have, treatises that she wrote in verse about reading poetry and appreciating literature and things like that. So there are such things. That's an interesting area that I like to do a little bit more translation work on, is some of these other texts. But these origin sort of texts, such as what I have on the screen here, there's very, very little sort of discursive information beyond just the naming of the names. So I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Yes. Thank you very much. And one more, if it's possible, question about this motive of finding the ideal place to live. Yes, do Knossos or those neighbors have the same motive of finding of a long trip, a long voyage for finding the ideal place to settle?
Well, yes, some of them certainly do. The epic that I translated, I published this in a book called Butterfly Mother a number of years ago, and these are Hmong or Miao epics from southeast Guizhou province. And of course, there's about 9 million or 10 million Miao in China also, and there's at least 4 major subgroups, and then many smaller groups. But the particular epic that I translated, yes, there were very long passages about migrations and about going here and there, and then finally finding a place to settle down that was acceptable. But the way it's presented in the Nosu Book of Origins, and all this other stuff about the ideal place, the Puvu is an especially good example of this kind of thing. And one of the reasons that I sort of looked at it this way was because I was, there's such small narrative content in it, so little discursiveness. I was trying to figure out, well, there's got to be some sort of structural pattern that's moving all this stuff along. And so I sort of just looked at it, and it really does correspond a lot to the landscape in Southwest China, where you really can imagine these people going up on a large hill and then looking down at these landscapes, like, where are we going to go? What is out there? And then descending and going down and finding, what's there, and whether or not, they're allowed to settle there, somebody else is there, or if the conditions are as good as they had hoped for, or whatever. So I think there's still a lot more that could probably be done, with those multiforms, but that's what I have done so far.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Actually, I'm quite sure that there are lots of questions, and even me only have such a huge amount of questions I would like to ask, and actually lectures also to hear, and I hope maybe in the future it would be possible, but probably it would be too selfish to keep our professor any more longer. So thank you so much, and I hope we will meet again in some lectures very soon.
Well, thank you. This has been a really great honor. Professor Riftin was certainly an incomparable figure, and it's really a great honor. And I'm so happy to have been able to talk with you today and meet some people who I've known about for a really long time. And so it's really been a wonderful experience for me. So thank you.
Great pleasure and honor for us as well. Thank you so much. And
okay, all right. We'll see you then.
see you soon.